They were so pious and sanctimonious about the Tories when they were in opposition, and they had plenty to have a go at on the Tories. No question about that. But it's now come back to bite them. The Sue Gray thing, I think, is a bit more worrying because it suggests that Keir Starmer doesn't have control of Downing Street in the way he should. And of course, that brought Boris Johnson down. He didn't have control of Downing Street. It was chaotic. And when a prime minister has to say, look, I'm in control, when he has to say that less than 3 months in power, you know it's a real mess. You know it's in real trouble. When he had normally prime ministers say, I'm in control in their dying days. That's not in their first.
Andrew Neil didn't just interview Keir Starmer. He tore him apart, volleying relentless, punishing questions as Starmer floundered with fragmented answers, panic flickering across his face. By the close, it felt less like an interrogation and more like a public collapse, leaving him a diluted, political husk, while Neil, almost unsatisfied, pressed on, transforming the entire encounter into something ruthlessly sharp and so painfully awkward it was nearly unbearable to watch.
That's not process, that's
well,
the
you're
rules.
following the process, but there's a bigger principle at stake, that Labour Party members who are being asked to vote for you should know who's bankrolling your campaign.
That is why the Labour Party set up those rules.
But you won't tell us.
The Labour Party rules say, carry out the checks, which we have to carry out, and I've got a compliance team doing that. Once you're satisfied the checks are carried out and the donations are proper in order, they go to the parliamentary authorities who put them on the parliamentary website so that everybody can see them. I've been following that procedure. That is exactly the parliamentary rules.
But the other candidates in this contest have published who is bankrolling their campaign. You seem to be hiding behind this process. Why won't you simply tell us tonight who are your 5 biggest donors?
Andrew, how can you say I'm hiding behind a process when it's the Labour Party process? The Labour Party, at the beginning of it...
Because you're hiding behind...
Keir Starmer faltered and hesitated like a radio hunting for a signal, flat and lifeless like cold tea, while Andrew Neil cut through the polished sound bites as if they were tissue paper. It never resembled a debate. Only a precise dismantling that left Starmer looking utterly out of his depth as... If he'd wandered by mistake into a gladiatorial arena, he had no chance of surviving.
Why don't you do what the other candidates do and tell... Don't Labour members have a right, as they decide whether to vote for you or not, they want to know where your money's coming from?
I've been asked that many times. I've said it's coming from trade unions, from crowdfunding, from individual donations.
Who's your biggest donor?
It's coming from those 3. One of my biggest donors was put up on the website, I think, yesterday.
Right, that's one of the lawyer.
Yes.
That's the law. But who are your 5 biggest donors?
Well,
you haven't announced. You've only announced about £125,000 worth of donations. This campaign costs a lot more than that. Doesn't transparency just demand? I mean, it's...
Keir Starmer moves like he's trapped in perpetual loading mode, every word mechanically scripted, every sentence teetering on an internal panic, turning any policy discussion into a soul-draining ordeal. Then Andrew Neil enters, calm, precise and razor-sharp, methodically dismantling Starmer's answers and exposing every flaw. By the end, Starmer looked less like a serious contender and more like someone who had wandered into the wrong room at exactly the worst possible moment.
There are a lot of fundamental issues which need to be tackled in our country. A lot of them are allowed just to atrophy under the Conservatives. They ran out of any reforming zeal. But given the scale of problems that we face, from health to infrastructure and so on, he just doesn't have the blueprint that is going to put that right. I think he can do some things that will improve matters, but this will not be a transformative government. He doesn't have it in him to be transformative. The cabinet isn't good enough to be transformative either. So I think it's the best you can hope for is that things get a bit better. And, even that would be...
The funniest part was how fast Starmer's courtroom trained composure crumbled. That carefully maintained air of control vanished, replaced by the expression of a man who'd suddenly remembered an urgent appointment. And the fractured sentences and fidgeting gestures surrendered the act. Completely, this wasn't authority or poise. It was pure panic, neatly wrapped in a tailored suit.
Consign everything Labour had to say about tax during the election campaign
to the dustbin of history. Consider how the narrative has changed. Before the election, we were assured that all Labour spending plans were fully costed and that there was no need for taxes to rise, bar a few small and specific increases like VAT on school fees. Within weeks of being elected, Chancellor Rachel Reeves claimed to have discovered a £22 billion fiscal black hole left behind by the dastardly Tories. The ER and the IFS had already warned that Labour would inherit an eye-wateringly tight fiscal position, but that didn't stop Reeves affecting to be surprised.
Starmer's economic spiel quickly morphed from solid policy into a corporate pet poster. All lofty talk of growth and fairness delivered as if words alone could produce results. But the instant Neil pressed for details, it unravelled, exposing nothing but vague assurances and unanswered questions. More bedtime story than actionable plan, polished and confident enough to sound convincing on the surface, yet utterly hollow the moment anyone demanded to see the mechanics behind it.
I don't think sort of thrashing around and blaming X, Y and Z.
But if you have nothing bad to say about it, and I would suggest to you, you cannot plan the future without understanding the past. And if you have nothing bad to say about Mr. Corbyn's leadership now, why did you take part in the attempt to topple him as leader in 2016?
Well, in the immediate aftermath of the referendum, I thought we needed a change, and I set out my reasons for it. We then had a leadership election. Jeremy won it convincingly. I accepted the members had put him in as leader, and I then served him for the next 3.5 years.
You said it was simply untenable to suggest that we can offer an effective opposition without a change of leader. Untenable.
But we then went...
Andrew Neil didn't just question Starmer, he slammed him with blunt, relentless facts, stripping the shine from every carefully crafted line. Every optimistic claim was met with documents, quotes, and statistics, forcing Starmer to retreat into vague buzzwords and recycled slogans, like someone trying to assemble a complex machine without a manual. By the close, the contrast was clear. Neil came armed with precision, while Starmer answered in fog.
Can you give me one tough message from you in this campaign that the Corbyn left would find unpalatable?
Well, that we have to unite the party, and that means taking people wherever they are.
Everybody wants to unite the party.
Well, everybody wants to unite the party, but you've got to model unity. What I'm doing in my campaign is I've got people from different parts of the party on my campaign working together, because I know that simply saying unity isn't enough. Everybody's going to say
that's not unpalatable. What I'm asking you is a position you're taking that the Corbyn left will find unpalatable.
Well, I'm not particularly interested in finding things that they find palatable.
The more Neil tightened the screws, the faster Starmer melted into a haze of cautious, pre-approved phrasing, impossible to grasp, like trying to hold fog. He sounded less like a potential leader and more like a glitching corporate chatbot, endlessly recycling decaffeinated sentences that said everything and nothing at once, simultaneously endorsing and hedging positions inside a political Schrodinger's box. Neil cut cleanly through the blur, and the pattern was clear. The moment real clarity was required, Starmer vanished into the mist.
He says the budget was a one-off, that others won't be like this one. But if the OBR's anemic growth forecasts are still too optimistic, she will be back for more tax and more borrowing. But it was a watershed budget. It propels the UK tax burden and public spending as a share of GDP towards European social democratic levels. That was no accident. It was the chosen direction of travel of the Starmer-Reeves project. Just why, unless driven by ideology, they want to join a collection of economies synonymous with slow growth and stagnation is a puzzle. But that is where they've chosen to head. And the OBR, in terms of what it means for economic growth and living standards for the rest of this decade, has already spelled out the...
Starmer's so-called vision for Britain dissolved almost instantly into a thick fog. And when Neil pressed on what life under a Labour government would actually feel like, the reply came back loaded with sweeping promises and glaringly absent specifics, like a presenter realising half the slides, never appeared. What followed were recycled slogans about unity and progress, flat and corporate in tone, offering no bold ideas, no texture, no conviction, just risk-free clicks masquerading as leadership. By the end, the truth was clear. This wasn't a vision at all, merely a placeholder, with no sign of the fog lifting anytime soon.
Some reports over the weekend that the government was briefing that this could add 2% to our GDP. Well, in their dreams, it's never going to do that. It's marginal at best. And the argument is not this deal on its own. Is it, where does it lead? Is that the end of it? Is this the end of the reset? Or is this the start of the reset? If it's the end of the reset, then it's marginal. There are some improvements in some areas where the government's made concessions that it shouldn't have done. But in the grand scheme of things, it's quite...
As Starmer wandered through a tangle of talking points, Andrew Neil's expression did the work. Part disbelief, part second-hand embarrassment. Starmer kept circling the same lines like a sat-nav, permanently stuck on recalculating, while Neil methodically stripped away the fade, exposing Labour's internal chaos, with infighting and power plays flashing like a reality show mid-collapse. Starmer's attempts at authority landed about as well as a cat trying to herd overexcited puppies, earnest, chaotic and unintentionally comical. By the end, the contrast was savage. Neil came armed with facts, Starmer relied on obscurity, and the internet immediately piled on with memes of no-signal Wi-Fi, endlessly buffering videos, and the viral hashtag #StarmerBuffering, immortalising the moment as accidental comedy born from robotic delivery colliding with relentless questioning. Andrew Neil didn't just test Starmer, he turned the interview into a cautionary tale, revealing a leader who looks polished on the surface but freezes the moment pressure hits, like a laptop stuck on a loading screen. What surfaced was a politician who struggles to explain policy, dodges direct challenges, and locks up under scrutiny. Slick soundbites offered no salvation. What was absent was weight, momentum, and genuine conviction. Until those appear, the exchange remains a stark lesson in image meeting reality, less epic drama, more painfully long pauses, with zero heroic comeback.